My completely naked wife was lying in front of her lover on the bed with her legs spread. I walked in, at the most inopportune moment. My name is Michael. I am 34 years old. My wife, Jess, and I got married 7 years ago. She's only a year younger than me. She is 33. At the time of the wedding, I was absolutely sure that I made the best choice of my life. Jessica turned out to be the perfect woman for me. Vibrant, emotional, sometimes explosive, but that's exactly what attracted me to her. She was the kind of person who makes your heart beat faster and truly feel alive. As for me, by nature I am a gentle, calm, good-natured person, always trying to avoid conflicts, willing to compromise, and believing that kindness can change the world. Perhaps this very trait of mine became one of the reasons for what happened later. Our daughters, two wonderful girls whom I love more than my own life. Our eldest, Emma, recently turned 5. She is incredibly similar to me, a gentle, quiet, thoughtful girl who loves books and calm games. Our youngest, Mia, is 3 years old, and she is the complete opposite of her sister. She clearly has her mother's character. She is active, stubborn, sometimes capricious, but at the same time tender and very affectionate when everything goes her way. We lived in a cozy suburb in a small but comfortable house that I bought right after our wedding. The house, surrounded by a well-kept garden, always seemed to me the perfect place for a happy family life. I worked as a manager in a large company, earned a stable salary above average, and did everything to provide my family with everything they needed. Jessica didn't work. She was occupied with the house and the children, and overall always seemed content with her life. I sincerely believe that we had a perfect marriage. Mutual understanding, respect, and love, though not always simple. However, in the past year, I began to feel that something had changed between us. I attributed the first worrying signs to the fatigue from daily concerns, raising two small children, and the lack of time for each other. Jess started to get irritated more often over small things. At times she would flare up over trifles, but as soon as she got what she wanted, a trip to the salon, a new handbag, or a dress, she would become affectionate and kind again, just like she used to be. There were little things I noticed but didn't want to acknowledge. For example, she used to always greet me joyfully when I came home from work, hug me, kiss me, and ask how my day went. But gradually she started doing it less and less, as if my coming home had become an ordinary and even boring event for her. I attributed it to routine. She could spend hours texting someone on the phone, but as soon as I appeared, she would abruptly end the conversation and switch her attention to the kids or household chores. I remember one evening particularly vividly. We were sitting at the table, as a family, having dinner, and Jessica seemed thoughtfully distant. At that time, I still didn't realize what exactly was bothering me about her behavior. At some point, she left the table to answer a call and talked for a long time in the next room in a hushed voice. When she returned, I inquired about her call, to which she sharply replied that it was her friend, managing to accuse me of meddling in things that weren't my business. I felt awkward, and I tried not to continue the conversation, although an unpleasant feeling lingered. Later, a week later, I started noticing that Jess had bought several sets of very beautiful and revealing lingerie. The strange thing was that she never wore them for me. When I asked who this beauty was for, she joked, saying she wanted to please herself. Then I decided to ignore my worries, considering them foolishness, jealousy. I continued living my usual life, believing that my wife was a faithful woman and that our family was strong and unbreakable. But deep down somewhere, very deep, a doubt began to form, which soon grew into a certainty, that things were not as good as they seemed to me. The first serious suspicions arose one Saturday, when I decided to organize a small family day. I wanted to liven up the relationship a bit and spend time with my wife and daughters. I reserved a table at a nice restaurant we hadn't been to in a long time, and afterwards I planned for the whole family to go to an amusement park. I didn't inform Jessica about my plan in advance. To my surprise, she wasn't too thrilled, but she agreed nonetheless. That morning I noticed she looked irritated, and while we were driving to the restaurant, she was nervously checking her phone, constantly texting, and seemed distracted. Several times I caught her thoughtful gaze and even asked, "Is everything okay, Jess? What's wrong?" To which I received a curt, "Everything's fine," and a pensive look. In the restaurant, Jessica continued to check her phone, typing messages quickly and nervously, barely participating in our conversation. It seemed to me that in those moments she was somewhere far away. I decided to joke to lighten the mood, saying that Jess is extremely popular today and can't get away from her admirers. She looked up and replied irritably that her friends were discussing where to go next week. I felt foolish, as if I was intruding into her personal life, and again I remained silent, although doubts had already begun to fill my mind. A few days after this incident, I came home a little earlier than usual. Jessica wasn't home. The kids were at her parents', and I decided to tidy up a bit. Picking up her clothes from the floor near the bed, I noticed something shiny. I picked up the item and froze. It was a cufflink, a man's cufflink. I had never worn anything like that, and among our friends no one wore anything like that either. I felt a chill on my hands, and my breathing quickened. In the evening, when Jessica came home, I gathered all my courage and asked, trying to stay calm, "Where is this from?" "Jess." I showed her the cufflink in my palm. She instantly turned pale, but quickly composed herself and replied with a slight smile that it was her dad's cufflink. It turns out he had recently stopped by to help hang the curtain rods. I was surprised myself why he would wear such things, but Jess promised to return the cufflink to him the next day. The answer seemed plausible. I once again pushed away bad thoughts. However, internally, I already understood that something didn't add up. Her father never wore shirts with such cufflinks, but I decided not to argue and just observe her more closely. The next few weeks were torturous for me. I constantly found myself intently watching her every step, gesture, every call or message on her phone. Sometimes it seemed to me that I was going crazy, losing control of myself, turning into a jealous, insecure person. The most painful was the feeling of distance that had appeared between us. In the evenings, she started moving to the edge of the bed, avoiding my embraces, making up excuses that she was tired, in a bad mood, or had to get up early the next day. One night, I couldn't take it anymore and quietly asked, "Hey Jess, what's happening to us? You seem like you've stopped noticing me." She slowly turned and looked at me with a long, cold gaze, then sighed, "I don't know. Maybe I'm just tired of the routine. Nothing has changed. Don't dramatize." But I already felt that this wasn't true. Something inside me was telling me that she had found someone else. I became more cautious, attentive, and decided to make sure of it for certain. I could no longer live in uncertainty. A few days later, I noticed a strange detail. When Jessica was taking a shower, her phone was on the bedside table. It was usually always locked, but this time I noticed that the screen stayed lit after a new message. I moved closer, my heart started beating faster, and I saw the sender's name. Alex. The message contained only 3 words that made me feel as if the ground had disappeared from under my feet. "I miss you." I returned to my place, feeling the blood rush to my head and my breath become uneven. Now I was sure that my doubts were not in vain. A cold determination seized me to find out the truth to the end, no matter what it would cost me. After that evening when I saw the message from Alex, my life changed. Every day I lived as if on pins and needles. Suspicions tore me apart from the inside. I tried to pretend that nothing was happening, but at night I couldn't sleep, replaying over and over again the words I had seen in my head. I began to closely observe Jessica's behavior, trying not to show it, but she suspected nothing, and that was the hardest part, seeing her calmness and her smile, knowing that it was all a lie. Determined to find out for sure, I ordered a small camera on Amazon, hidden in a clock, which I placed on the shelf in the living room. I lied to Jessica, saying that I was going on a business trip for a few days. She decided to take the girls to her parents during this time. The day of my business trip arrived. I left the house with a heavy heart, fearing what I might see later. But I knew that I had to do it to put an end to my doubts, once and for all. That evening, sitting in the car, not far from the house and watching the camera feed on my phone, I saw something that changed my life forever. I saw Jessica open the door to a man. It was Alex, whom I knew as a colleague from her work. They immediately embraced, as if they had been waiting for this for a long time. My heart was pounding wildly, my breath was erratic, but I couldn't take my eyes off the screen. They moved to the living room and started talking. The conversation was brief. He expressed dissatisfaction and thought that I would never leave. But my wife decided to turn everything into a joke and mention how blind I am, and notice nothing, even if I were standing right in front of them while they enjoyed each other's company. I was breathless by those words. I couldn't believe that the woman I loved so much could speak so cruelly about me. Then they started kissing, so passionately and openly, like we hadn't kissed in a long time. After a few minutes, they went out of the camera's view. I realized I couldn't sit here and wait any longer. I needed to see everything with my own eyes. Despite all the pain, I quietly entered the house through the back door. My heart was pounding so hard it seemed like it could be. I heard Jessica's muffled laughter coming from the second floor. As I climbed the stairs, my legs felt like they were filled with lead, but I kept moving forward to the room that used to be a symbol of our closeness and happiness. Our bedroom. The door was slightly ajar, and I peeked inside. What I saw pierced me like a hot knife. My wife, completely naked, was lying on our bed with her legs spread. Alex stood in front of her, also naked. They were so engrossed in each other that they neither heard nor saw anything around them. I stood rooted to the spot, unable to move. My breathing became erratic and my vision darkened. I felt nauseous and dizzy, but I couldn't tear my eyes away from this scene, which completely shattered my world. "Alex, please, don't stop," I heard her moaning voice, which once belonged only to me. Those words made my heart completely break. I was overwhelmed with anger and horror at the same time. I flung the door open and entered the bedroom, looking directly at them. Jessica screamed, trying to cover herself with the blanket, while Alex froze in shock. I felt like I was suffocating. That words were incredibly hard to come by, but I still managed to squeeze out in a cold voice that I was convinced that it was all true. I just didn't expect it to be so disgusting. Alex quickly grabbed his things, avoiding looking in my direction, and almost ran out of the room. Jessica, still trembling, looked at me with panic and confusion. She pleaded for a chance to explain. She asked to talk, said that things weren't as they might seem, so I just realized that my wife had been lying to my face. She destroyed everything that was between us. Everything. And she did it in our bed. In our house. I almost shouted, not recognizing myself. She burst into tears, trying to say something, but I wasn't listening anymore. I started to shake. I ran out of the house and slammed the door behind me. Already outside, I vomited right on the lawn near our house. The nausea was unbearable, and the pain inside was so intense that I couldn't hold back the tears. I got into the car and drove away. I wasn't paying attention to the road, trying to figure out how to continue to live, when my entire life collapsed in a single moment. Now I knew everything. Everything. Now I knew everything for sure and understood that this was just the first step on a long journey to regain control of my life. I drove not paying attention to the road, feeling neither time nor distance. In my head, the nightmare I had just witnessed played over and over again. Finally, gathering my thoughts, I stopped the car in an empty parking lot near a 24-hour supermarket. My heart was pounding so hard that the pain echoed in my temples. For a few minutes I just sat there trying to calm down. Then I took my phone and called my best friend David. He wanted to know where I was and what had happened in general. I didn't know how to explain it all to him, because I just told him what I felt and said that Jessica was cheating on me. I had just seen everything with my own eyes. David asked me to come to his house immediately and talk to him. I went over that same evening. David greeted me with concern in his eyes, kiss. We sat in the kitchen almost all night, discussing the situation that had occurred in my life. My friend advised me not to act rashly, not to call Jessica right now, and to try to calm down a bit. He reminded me that in our state, divorce can be granted on grounds of fault, and that meant I needed to gather irrefutable evidence of her infidelity. The next day, I called a lawyer, who immediately agreed to help me. We discussed the situation, and the lawyer advised me not to contact Jessica until all evidence of her unfaithfulness was gathered, including camera recordings and any correspondence. Meanwhile, Jessica called me dozens of times, left tearful voice messages, asking to talk and explain, but I couldn't bring myself to answer. Her voice messages only made me feel pain and disgust. I temporarily stayed at David's place. It was a difficult time. I couldn't sleep properly, barely ate. My condition was noticeably deteriorating. David convinced me to seek a psychologist. I started attending sessions regularly. The psychologist here helped me cope with the all-consuming pain and anger that had settled within me. After a week, I went home. Making sure Jessica wasn't there, I gathered all my belongings that I might need. With difficulty crossing the threshold of the house, I felt an incredible bitterness looking at the walls that once were filled with happy memories. I couldn't imagine that this place would now become a symbol of betrayal for me. Meanwhile, I was methodically preparing for the divorce. With the help of a lawyer, I gained access to phone records, where I discovered a long correspondence between Jessica and Alex, full of explicit messages and shared plans. This data finally confirmed that the affair had been going on for several months. All this time, Jessica was leading a double life, pretending to be a caring wife and mother to me and the children. One evening, when David and I were discussing further actions, a call came in. Jessica's sister, Amber, called. Her voice was trembling with indignation and sympathy at the same time. She knew everything. She had accidentally overheard her conversation with Alex, and she was very ashamed of her sister. And if I needed help in court, Amber said she was ready to confirm everything. I remembered every word she said perfectly, as if it had been said at least 1,000 times. I was grateful to Amber, as she could significantly ease the process. A few days after the conversation with Amber, I officially filed for divorce, citing infidelity as the reason, I felt strangely free and simultaneously empty. When Jessica received the notice, her reaction was extremely intense. She tried to contact me, asked for a meeting again. She used all manipulative tactics, from tears and pleas for forgiveness to threats of taking the children away forever. But I was no longer the same soft person. Inside me there was a firm determination to see it through to the end. The court scheduled a preliminary hearing. I went there with my lawyer, Amber, and David, feeling confident, while Jessica seemed broken, yet she tried to convince the judge that it was a mistake, that everything could be fixed. When the lawyer presented the evidence, including witness correspondence records, her face turned pale with despair and anger. The judge listened carefully to both sides and ruled that the evidence supporting my case was convincing, and the divorce would be considered due to Jessica's fault. Further hearings were to address the issue of property division and child custody. After that day, I felt a strange sense of relief. For the first time in many days, I had the feeling that I was taking control of my life again. I understood that tough days lay ahead, but I was ready for it. I had to fight not only for myself, but also for Emma and Mia, so they could grow up in a stable and happy environment. Now I knew for sure there was no turning back. The legal proceedings were one of the most difficult periods of my life. I knew the process would be unpleasant, but I couldn't even imagine how emotionally challenging it would be. Our lawyer, Mr. Harris, meticulously prepared for each session. I provided all the records, from cameras, correspondence, phone calls, witness testimonies from Amber and David. My entire life over the past few months was laid out in a thick folder of documents. At the first hearing, Jessica appeared accompanied by her lawyer. Her gaze was heavy, cold. She looked at me with both resentment and anger. When the judge began the proceedings, her lawyer immediately tried to ease the situation. Addressing the judge, she pointed out the fact that her client deeply regrets what happened. It was a single mistake, and she is willing to do anything to keep the family together. My lawyer promptly responded by presenting records that clearly showed this was far from the only mistake. The judge carefully reviewed all the evidence, occasionally casting a stern judgmental look at Jessica, a stern look of condemnation. When it was Amber's turn to testify, she spoke firmly, though her voice trembled. She had accidentally overheard a conversation between Jessica and Alex. The wife was discussing how tired she was of family life with me, called me a boring and weak person, and said that she had finally found a man who gives her emotions and pleasure. These words deeply hurt me, even though I already knew the truth. Hearing it in the courtroom was twice as painful. After Amber's testimony, the judge called me and also asked a few questions. Jessica tried to intervene, interrupting during my speech. She claimed that it was me, I destroyed the family, that I am ruining the future of our children. But the judge interrupted her several times, in the end promising to throw her out of the courtroom for such behavior. After several tense sessions, the court issued a final decision, and the divorce was recognized as Jessica's fault. The property was divided equally, or more precisely, Jessica had to buy out my share of the house. Custody of the children was also equal. I was required to pay child support for my daughter. After the final session, Jessica approached me in the courthouse corridor and tried to talk again. She asked for a chance and talked about how the children need both of us. Her words touched me deeply once more. I looked at her without any feeling of pity, but with pain in my chest. My wife would never have done this, which means you are not her, I said. I turned and walked away, feeling a strange freedom, and at the same time a heavy emptiness inside. The first few months after the divorce were incredibly difficult. I continued living with David. regularly visited a psychologist, and gradually restored my emotional state. Emma and Mia became my main priority. Together with the psychologist, we tried to explain the changes to them as gently as possible. In the family, emphasizing that mom and dad still love them very much. I picked up the girls from Jessica's parents, avoiding any contact with my ex-wife. Every time they ran towards me with beaming smiles, I felt that I had done the right thing by not allowing this situation to destroy our bond. Amber mentioned that Jessica for a long time tried to portray herself as a victim, complaining to friends about how harshly I treated her. She continued to lead a chaotic lifestyle, meeting new men through dating sites, but regularly sent me messages about how she loved and wanted to reunite the family. I simply deleted these messages without reading them. Gradually, I began to feel stronger, more confident. I realized that this crisis helped me become a person who clearly understands his boundaries and no longer allows himself to be manipulated. One evening, sitting in David's backyard, I looked at the starry sky, and for the first time in a long while, felt at peace. I felt a deep gratitude that my life was gradually getting back on track. Most importantly, my daughters were still with me and love me just as much as I love them. After some time, I planned to move into a new house, to start a new chapter of my life, full of hopes and goals. Perhaps I could once again meet someone who I could trust and love. But for now, the main thing for me was to heal those emotional wounds that Jessica had inflicted on me. Looking at my daughters, I realized that this whole painful journey was worth it. I was glad to have freed myself from the toxic relationship with Jessica. Despite all the pain, I was grateful for this experience. I knew that now my life belonged only to me and my girls. I was determined to do everything, to never again experience such betrayal again. My life was just beginning. Thank you for watching our video to the end. You can also watch our previous videos on the channel. Don't forget to subscribe and set up notifications. That way you won't miss any stories we release. Thank you, and see you soon.